Hey everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. We're going to be trying to answer a question I really hoped I wouldn't have to ask for quite a while, but here we are. How much computer can you buy for $1,000?
We're in the money, we're in the money. We've got a lot of what it takes to get along.
The last time I bought a computer, I spent about $800 on a major upgrade, and that was reusing mostly the case and I think an optical drive at the time. And that was like 9 years ago. Not quite a year after Sandy Bridge had come out and the i5-2500K was still a fairly hot processor. And then later that got upgraded to an i7-3770S off of eBay, and that's what I've been using ever since. I've got 16 gigs of RAM, I've gone through a couple graphics cards, I've gone through a couple hard drives, but parts of the computer date back to that build, and some of the hardware that was reused in that build was even older. Here we are, still using this computer. The hardware market's changed a lot, my tastes have changed a lot. I'm not really into gaming, but there is something I am doing now that takes a lot of computing horsepower and disk space, and that's video editing. Now, even in spite of that, I've been getting by with this system.
It's kind of boring. I wonder what's on C-SPAN.
But I've reached a point where one day my sound died, and it didn't come back until I moved the sound card up one slot. That spooked me a little bit, especially since I've also had some system crashes at weird times. There's just a lot of things leading me to believe that I've got a system that's about done. It's time to finally bite the bullet and build something new. Now, I've got a mouse, I've got a keyboard, I've got monitors, so I'm not buying any of that. So my budget is going to be just to try and assemble a box that will meet my needs and cap the budget right around $1,000, including a Windows 10 license. So today, we're going to look at what I came up with and why. To start a parts search, it's important to know about how much you want to spend. You'll need to have an idea of your minimum hardware requirements, but a maximum hardware configuration is a moonshot prospect and requires about twice as much money to achieve. Want to spec a PC that's worth more than the newest car in your driveway? Yep, someone will build it. It's good to get advice from hardware review websites, forums, YouTube channels, and other places where techies can be found. But as you will soon find when asking for advice about what to build, nobody has a budget so large or so generous as someone spending someone else's money. For our build, we did a bit of initial research and settled on a budget. There were 4 non-negotiable items that had to fit in our budget if we were even going to do this build successfully. First, the processor had to be quad-core or better with SMT support getting us at least 8 threads. That meant we were buying either a Ryzen 5 or Intel i5 from the current generation product lineups. Second, the system drive had to be an SSD or M2 drive with a capacity of about 500 GB or more. Third, a large storage drive was needed. We've had good experience with Toshiba in the past and quickly settled on their N300 6TB model, which would not give us a case of the shingles. Fourth and finally, it needed to be a complete build other than peripheral devices. The only part we would reuse from our existing box was a 5.25-inch Blu-ray drive. From there, it was a simple question. Do we buy entirely from a parts list? Do we start with a bare-bones kit and add parts to it? Or is there a pre-built system out there that would meet all or most of our needs? So yeah, after going through all that, I tried pricing them all. I priced Dell, and then I'd have the Windows license. I tried pricing Micro Center. There is a Micro Center in Denver, but it's about 20 miles away. I tried pricing Newegg. I tried looking on Amazon. I even went for a few weird ones like CDW just to see what was out there and if I could get maybe a refurb deal. Finally, I decided I was going to have to settle on one place and just order it all, and I decided to go ahead with Newegg. Now, Newegg's had some ups and downs over the past few years, so I was pleasantly surprised to see that they have cleaned that up a bit. I was able to sort everything by shipped by Newegg and in some fairly neat categorizations. When I ordered, everything shipped within about a day or two. So that was a real nice throwback to the old days, 15 plus years ago when Newegg always had everything on the shipping dock the same day you ordered it if you ordered before 4 o'clock Pacific. So everything shipped, and the next thing I had to do was wait. Okay, the majority of our PC order has arrived. I believe, based on tracking data, the only thing I'm missing are my 6TB storage hard drive and my graphics card. Okay, there it is. Nothing spectacular, but it looks like it sits nice and level. Antec Performance P7 Silent mid-tower computer case, 2x USB 3.0, sound dampening side panel, fans, okay. $54.99. Now those of you who have spent any time at all shopping cases know that a $54.99 case is kind of at the bottom of the food chain. I currently have a very nice Antec Sonata over 10 years old, and I like it, but it doesn't have USB 3.0 on the front panel, and I know there are ways of converting that. It takes a little doing. But the other thing, I don't want to actually pull any hardware out of that one until I am absolutely certain I never need to boot that again, because I have a hunch it might not boot ever again. So I'm going to build the entire PC in a new case. I like the look of it. I think it'll be pretty nice there under the desk. And having the USB ports at the very top is going to be useful to me. It does have a single 5 1/4 bay. And then on the top here we have power, mic, reset, headphones, 2 USB 3.0. It's a very clean looking case for being so cheap. And the other feature that made me choose this one over some of the other low-end cases is the fact that it does have the bottom-mounted power supply. Hard drives are accessed from the back, and this one did come with 2 fans. The power supply bay is mostly isolated, but it does, as we can see here, cool down into the hard drives. So it looks like the hardware is in one of these drive caddies. It's nice having those back there. And then the entire hard drive caddy can also be removed. This is a lot of case for $54, and it's even got rolled edges, so hopefully I won't make any blood sacrifices when I assemble this. Can't argue with it. And then, of course, we even have our 2 SSD trays here. So SSD, conventional 3.5 hard drive, conventional 3.5 hard drive. I don't see any issues living with this one. Okay, so we've looked at our case. Let's pop open the rest of our box, see what we've got in here. The all-important Windows license. A lot of the other ways I could order, say, a bare bones system, or even, let's go with a Dell, often came with Home. It's an extra $100 from Microsoft to upgrade to Professional. So once I started budgeting that in, that is the Corsair CX450. That's not their low-end one that some people have complained about. The CX is a decent mid-range PSU. All right, next up, went with AMD on this build. This here is the Asus Prime B450M. It is AMD B450. It does have an onboard M2 slot. Now, this being a micro ATX and not one of the top end ones, it was only $79.99, I believe. Now, there are boards a little bit cheaper, including a couple ASRoCs that probably would have worked. I went with Asus because they usually do a good job even on their lower end stuff. We have a slot here for our AMD Ryzen 5 CPU. We do have 4 RAM slots, and then we have onboard network, onboard sound, USB 3.0 on the back, and if you are using the onboard graphics, we also have HDMI, DVI, and VGA, and interestingly, we have 2 PS2 ports, maybe if you're going with some sort of terminal application. I've got a PCIe X16 slot for my GPU, which will be coming, even though this does support onboard graphics, more on that in a minute, and then 2 PCIe X1s. And then I've got all the headers neatly lined up along the bottom. It's a very clean board layout. Asus usually does a pretty good job. That's not to say others are bad, just that for a lower cost board especially, I tend to trust them. Now, CPU. This one's going to be a little controversial. This here is the AMD Ryzen 5 3400G. Unlike the Ryzen 3s, this one here is a quad-core 8-thread. There are 6-core Ryzens available for, maybe 40 to 50 more. But again, I was ordering this all in one place with whatever was available that fit in the budget. And after weighing CPU options back and forth, I finally decided this was the best thing I could get that would have more than 4 threads. On a related note, don't judge your past self too harshly once you've committed to a purchase. There will always be a newer product and a better sale on the horizon. In the month it took us to research this system, build this system, and create this video, this happened. Will I use the onboard graphics? Most likely not. This here is a G.SKILL Ripjaws set. Why this particular one? Let me quote the price to you. G.SKILL Ripjaws V-Series, 16GB, 2x8 kit, DDR4 3600, $69.99. This was the least expensive thing I could find that came from a halfway reputable manufacturer. Intel solid state drive, 660p series. And I know this is going to be controversial because everyone's going to jump on this and say, ooh, you bought a QLC drive as your boot drive? Doesn't QLC have a short lifetime? Well, there's been some fears of that, but the technology's gotten to this point where people just aren't reporting it. $72.99 for 512 gigabytes. Okay, a couple days have passed. We've now got our other two boxes, which should wrap up our Newegg order. So let's just pop these open real quick. Okay, two boxes, more of the usual thingies. This is a Gigabyte GeForce GTX 1650 Super. Now there's also a 1650, and then there's the 1650 Super, and then there's the 1660, all kind of crowded around near the bottom end of their lineup right now. And you might think, oh, 1650 Super, what's super about it? Well, NVIDIA, in their usual wisdom, only has about 8 model numbers that they are allowed to use for their entire product lineup at any given time, and so they just kind of shuffle them between product generations. 1650 Super is actually a different GPU than the 1650. It's roughly the same GPU architecture as the 1660. It doesn't have as many CUDA cores, but it is a much better product than the 1650, and right now, there's only about a $10 difference online. Ah, excellent. This is the Toshiba N300. This is a NAS-targeted storage hard drive. This one here, 3.5-inch hard drive with a 6 terabyte capacity, 7,200 RPM, 128 megabyte buffer and all that. This is the kind of storage space I need in order to deal with my video hobby, especially now that I'm occasionally filming some of my footage in 4K. The next step is going to be to get all of this put together. Okay, we're going to try and go for a basic assembly here. Let's start with our shiny new case. And our initial work is going to be right in here, getting the motherboard installed. Here's my user guide. I'll probably be consulting this for some of the front port assemblies. These little grounding hardware tabs need to be bent back a little bit, especially like, for example, on the network ports here. Sometimes if they catch, it'll push one in instead of pushing under it. And now the motherboard's going to go in. Now, where did that spare standoff now go? Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3. So these top 3 line up 1 to 1. I then have 4, 5. Okay, so I'm going to have to move a couple of these because I'm using micro ATX. A very important step is to look at the mounting holes on the motherboard and verify that you have all and only all of the ones you need installed. Sometimes if there's a rogue one that's in another place, someone may overlook it, install the board over it, but then try to fire up the computer and either doesn't start or it randomly reboots, or worst case scenario, something actually explodes. This again is another point that can cause trouble for a novice builder because this thing's kind of springy. As is. It's worse if you accidentally get one of those bent under there because you'll be applying a decent amount of pressure here and think you're just pushing it in place, and actually you're burying one of those grounding tabs inside a port. Okay, we finally have it. So I will have to push this in just slightly to start setting my first couple screws here. This is one of those scenarios where you don't want to work too fast. In fact, you don't necessarily even want to torque the screws tight until you have all of them installed. You know, just gently snug, but not tight. And then you go back and just give them one little extra twist to make sure that they're making good contact with the little ground rings on them. Also, in a case where you had the power supply installed above the motherboard, as a number are configured, you wouldn't want to do the motherboard first, most likely. You'd probably want to do the power supply first because it's a heavy component. One little slip can trash your motherboard. Likewise, just turn gently while putting these screws in, because if you're roughing with this and you slip and bang the motherboard, again, these do have some hardiness to them, but it's a delicate circuit board with multiple layers. It's not meant to be abused. This particular case is very nicely designed with a wide open space on the back side of the board here. So if I had a CPU heatsink configuration that required me to change out that plate, I can get to it. Not all of them are like that, especially on some older systems. And where are my fan headers? I definitely see one there called chassis fan. I see another one up here called CPU fan, and still another one called chassis fan. But that's fine, because that means I've got 3 fan headers and I've got 3 fans. The back case fan, the front case fan, and the CPU fan. So I've got a place to plug in all of them. Let's go ahead and get our Ryzen CPU installed. I want to be very, very careful with this because it is a pinned processor. So you drop this, you're going to have a bunch of bent pins, and that is going to be a very bad day. Wait, there's a missing pin on one corner here, so which one is that? Okay, it's the one with the little arrow on it. So the little arrow matches to that top corner there. I need to make sure that is down in. It's not like bouncing out or sitting on a corner of a pin or anything. And then very gently close this lever. Okay, CPU should be in. Next stage is going to be our heatsink. For that we will need heatsink compound. Unless AMD happened to include a thermal pad on this heatsink, and they did. Well, heatsink compound is usually recommended, but I'm also not going to be overclocking this at all. So I'm going to go ahead and install it like this. It's one of those spring screw types. So I just have to get these 2 plastic retention clips off of here because this cooler doesn't use the retention clip design. I'm going to go ahead and bag these up later because if I ever change to a heatsink type that does use these retention clips, I might want them again. Oh, hello. These screws are retaining that back plate, and I do need that back plate in order to install my heatsink. Notice the orientation. It was like this with the part number facing up. The other thing is just to make sure that this plastic insulating sleeve stayed on. I'm going to have to work with it like this. And these screws have spring tensioners. So what I want to do is I don't want to tension them all the way. I want to just get them started on all 4 corners because I got to put some pressure, and this is not great for the motherboard. I now have all 4 of them started. Let's go ahead and rotate this back around to where I've got better light. I now have to very, very carefully just tighten them. Word of warning, when you're dealing with that kind of force on a board, you gotta be very concerned about the possibility that this is only gonna go in and out once. So if I get the notion to start swapping CPUs and heatsinks, that might be the end of life for the board. Okay, so here's the 4-pin connector for the CPU fan. So that goes in like that. Looks like the next best thing to do is put in the memory. So now I have memory to install. Like most system memory, it's keyed, it's slightly offset from center this way. Now I believe this uses dual channel. The slots are in fact color coded, so I need to make sure that I only use 2 slots of one color. I didn't realize the CPU heatsink was going to be in the way. That is another problem sometimes. If these had like fancy little LED fins or something off of them, I actually wouldn't be able to use this top slot unless possibly if I rotated the cooler around. But in this case, it looks like I'm going to be okay. So now I do the same thing over here, make sure it's in the slot, make sure everything's aligned, press straight down until it clicks. All right, CPU and processor, heatsink in, memory in. The only other thing I need to install in the front side here is my GPU. Now, let's hold off on that because I still need to put a bunch of cabling in as well. And before I finish up the cabling, I want to go ahead and get the power supply put in. At this point, in theory, it would boot, but I still want to go ahead and install the GPU and the M2 card. So we'll just finish up a little bit of wire management here. But yeah, I'm really impressed for the quality of the cable management and all features, and all the little thoughtful access points have been placed in here. In ye olden days, these were often just little random little connector pieces that you had to kind of figure out, but anymore they tend to label them fairly nicely. This is just a little bit small for my aging eyes. And I'm not getting much information on the front panel connector. Okay, let's try ASUS motherboard front panel. Okay, so this one is telling me that I actually need to slide this over, but the last pin there is not connected to anything. Yeah, let's just make sure I wasn't overlooking something. That is item 9. This connector supports several chassis mounted functions. Hey, that's great. No diagram. USB 3.1 Gen 1 connector. Yes. USB 3.0. Cool. And that should be the last of the front panel. Hopefully everything now works. Still going to need a SATA cable at some point to the back there, so I could go ahead and just plug that in now, because one and two, and the one with the 90 degree is going to be my 1. That'll be easy enough to remember later. And there are just 2 more steps before I can go ahead and try booting this. One is to get my M2 SSD installed. Tiny little thing, and oh, I see. You actually, okay. I've only ever installed these in laptops where they're usually just one size. This one here, because it has all these different locations where it could go, you actually install the standoff in the correct one to make sure that there's no risk of them shorting other mounting points. So, again, this one you don't want to over torque, because that's a tiny little thread that could just go places. There we go. Okay, I learned something new. Whew. Ever so slightly. Okay, that's a relief. I didn't think I was going to get that started. Okay, there it is. Now I just have the GPU. Okay, last item. So this just came with, it's like the GPU and a graphics card quick guide. I mean, you really don't need more than that these days. The drivers change so fast, there's no point including a CD. Surprisingly beefy little guy. Now, in order to install that, I need to pull these 2. That explains why they gave me those spares. These are just breakaway blanks. So if I ever need to go back and fill any of those, that's why I need to have these. I just watched it clip into place, and it's down on this side. So the last thing to do there is install my 6-pin power connector, and it has the 8-pin detachable because this one doesn't use it, which is fine. I may as well go ahead and install my Toshiba drive down here. First time I've seen them come in those little plastic bubbles like that. So, for drive 1, it's going to have to open this slot one way or another. There you go. Could be a completely screwless drive cage if you want it to be, but since it does have the 2 optional holes there, and I like that because it's just one more way to ensure it doesn't drop out magically when you fumble with it later. I'm going to go ahead and install these 2. Okay, and that should just slide in there and snap. Huh. Wow. That's odd. Oh, it's actually not that odd. That's what happens when you plug it in backwards. Let's try that again, shall we? It's amazing how easily things install when you install them correctly. Crossed fingers, that should be a computer that boots. So there you have it. It looks like that's about what $1,000 buys these days. If you're willing to go with a little bit lower end case, you don't need the top end of, say, the CPU, the graphics card, and some of those things. You can build a decent mid-range system, but it is not going to be a barn burner. And that's okay for me. It's still all going to juggle right around that $1,000 price point. You want less, you're going to have to go to a Ryzen R3 or maybe one of the lower end Intel processors, and just accept that there's going to be some limitations there. Maybe you're looking for a computer and want to build something similar. Maybe not, but just make sure that as you go into it, you spend some time pricing and have realistic expectations about what you're going to end up with.
Has anyone seen my phone?